My name is Sadie Morgan. I'm 32 years old, living and working in accounting in Boston. But the story I'm about to tell you isn't about spreadsheets, numbers, or contracts. It begins on a spring night, among the clinking of wine glasses, under dazzling crystal lights, with more than 100 guests dressed in formal attire inside the three-story mansion where my mother was hosting her 60th birthday party. I remember the moment clearly. My mother stood up to applause and laughter, her voice ringing out firmly through the microphone. My eldest daughter, Sadie, will sell the house her grandmother left behind and transfer it to her younger sister, Emily. If not, Sadie is no longer our daughter. The whole room froze for less than a second, then suddenly filled with looks of pity, curiosity, and judgment aimed directly at me. Emily dabbed her eyes with a tissue right on cue, like a perfectly staged scene. But what they didn't know was that only hours before the party, I had quietly completed a transaction that would leave everyone there speechless, and the buyer of that house was the very person Emily feared most. Have you ever been turned into the family traitor in front of a crowd? Have you ever been forced to give up everything just because you were considered the stronger one? Leave a comment if you've ever been pressured by your family. Hit like if you support those who dare to stand up for their rightful share. And subscribe if you want to hear the whole story. Because what happened after that was even more shocking. I remember those winter mornings in Boston all too well. My mother would bustle in the kitchen making breakfast for Emily, while I poured myself a bowl of cold cereal, curling up at the corner of the table, waiting for the sound of my mother's high heels and my sister's cheerful chatter to fade behind the door. My father sat with his newspaper, a steaming cup of coffee beside him. I once brought him a science project graded A+, hoping for praise. But he only glanced at it and muttered without lifting his eyes from the politics section. Good. Go apply to some community colleges yourself. Emily needs us to focus on her Brown application. I was the child who didn't need worrying about. That's how my mother described me to her friends, her voice light and falsely proud. Sadie's fine. She's been independent since she was little. In that house, independent meant forgotten. Emily was chauffeured to Preston Academy, a private school with tuition high enough to buy a new car every year. I, on the other hand, applied for scholarships to public schools year after year, catching the freezing bus at 6 a.m., clutching my backpack in a thin hope that my mother would remember to sign my permission slip for the science fair. I never blamed Emily. I never hated her. But I could never forget the birthdays my mother threw for her in French restaurants, complete with a clown and a small orchestra, while my own birthdays were marked by a supermarket cake, sometimes without even a single candle. And I will never forget the day Emily turned 16. My mother drove her to the dealership, tied a ribbon on the hood of a brand new Mini Cooper, and told me to record the whole thing like a hired cameraman. And me? At 16, I asked my father for a used bike so I could get to my part-time job at the city library, and he only said, "Walking is good exercise." Everyone in my family treated loving Emily like a sacred duty. Every failure of hers was reframed as a learning opportunity. Every minor success was praised as if it were a national triumph. Meanwhile, when I was recognized or won awards, my parents were rarely there. At 15, when I won first place in the statewide science fair, I scanned the auditorium for family. None came, but my grandmother Margaret did. She sat in the third row, wearing her ivory sweater and an old hand-knit hat, clapping so hard you'd think I was the first person to set foot on the moon. She was the only one who ever truly saw me. She never called me independent. She said I was resilient. Unlike my parents, she never compared me to Emily. She didn't care which school I attended or whether I pursued a prestigious career. To her, it was enough that I lived with integrity, worked hard, and never let anyone take my voice away. Every summer I went to her home in Charleston. A two-story white wooden house with a wide porch and bougainvillea climbing around the windows. She taught me to plant tomatoes, brew mint tea, and most importantly, read contracts. She had been a real estate lawyer before retiring. When I asked why she made me learn about deeds and legal documents instead of letting me play like Emily, she only smiled. Because, Sadie, you don't have any adults willing to protect you. You must learn to protect yourself. We didn't talk much about my parents, but she saw everything I tried to hide. On afternoons when I ran out to the porch after being scolded by my mother for lacking grace. When I refused to lend Emily money, she would sit beside me in silence, hand me a glass of lemonade and an old book. You don't need to fight to be loved, Sadie, but you have the right to refuse being used. I memorized every word. While Emily spent summers abroad in Italy, I worked part-time at the local bookstore. While she went to spas with my mother, I cleaned the study with Grandma, learning how to sort wills and estate papers. She was the first to hand me a sample will and say, "If you ever need this one day, at least you'll know where to start." At 18, I received a full scholarship in accounting at the State University in Massachusetts. My parents didn't attend orientation, too busy preparing Emily's high school graduation party. Grandma Margaret drove over 4 hours to campus, waited until I finished registration, and then shared lunch with me at the student cafeteria. Just a cold sandwich and 2 sodas, but it was the only meal in my life that ever felt like a true celebration. She lived 14 more years. During that time, I graduated, worked, moved into a small studio. Emily eventually finished college after years of delays, 6 changes of major, and finally landed a job at a media firm thanks to my parents' connections while I was doing tax consulting for them. Grandma passed peacefully in her armchair by the window, where she loved to read every morning. I was the only one there when she drew her last breath. No one else from my family made it in time. None even answered the hospital's call. I didn't resent them. I wasn't even sad anymore, because before she left, Grandma gave me everything. Not just the house, but a legacy, the conviction that I deserved protection, that my voice had value, and that I would never again have to stand behind Emily just to be noticed. What I never imagined was that very house becoming the battlefield. And when my family discovered I was the sole heir, they didn't ask why. They only asked, "When will you sign the transfer papers for Emily?" They forgot one thing. I was the child they had overlooked, but I was also the child Grandma Margaret had taught to defend what I loved. 3 weeks after her funeral, I was invited to the office of the lawyer handling the estate. There was no grand will reading like in the movies, just a private meeting with Mrs. Evans, Grandma's old friend and personal lawyer for more than 20 years. Her office was in a small red brick building on King Street, walls covered with black and white photos of Charleston in the 1960s. The smell of old wood and paper reminded me of summer afternoons in Grandma's study, listening to her explain the difference between ownership and use rights. Mrs. Evans placed a thick, sealed envelope in front of me. Inside was the notarized will, a property survey map, and a handwritten letter. The handwriting was exactly as I remembered from Christmas cards. "My dear Sadie, this house is yours. Not because you are the best granddaughter, but because you are the only one who understands what it truly means. It is not just a home. It is history, memory, the place where the women in our family have stood strong for 3 generations." I couldn't keep reading. My hands shook. Mrs. Evans stayed silent out of respect. "Along with it," she said softly, "comes full ownership, no conditions to share or co-own with anyone." I nodded, unable to speak. Emotion choked my chest, but underneath was a quiet affirmation that I had not imagined Grandma's love. Only days later, my mother called. Her voice was gentler than usual. "Sweetheart, your father and I want to talk about Grandma's house." I kept my tone even. "I just received the documents from the lawyer's office." "Yes, I know," she hesitated. But here's the thing. Emily is planning to marry Brandon. Remember him? And they're looking for a house in the area. But the prices in Charleston now, my goodness, impossible. I stayed silent, waiting for the request I knew was coming. Grandma loved Emily so much. I think if she were still alive, she would want you to share part of it with your sister. Or better yet, let Emily have it in her name. You don't really need to live there. I do live there, I said slowly. Every summer since I was 11. And Emily, do you remember she once called that house a boring place without air conditioning? My mother chuckled lightly. Awkward. Oh, she didn't mean it. I didn't argue then. I knew they had never imagined I would inherit anything of worth. To them, I was always the one who would manage on her own, while Emily was the child who needed help. Their reasoning always circled back to securing Emily's future, as if my happiness was never part of the equation. A week later, I received an email from my father. No greeting, no asking about my well-being, just one line: send a copy of the house deed. The family is reviewing more reasonable financial options. That same day, Emily posted a long social media update with photos from her wedding trial shoot, captioned vaguely, "Hoping to soon have a home that holds such special meaning for our family." Comments flooded in with congratulations. Some even wrote, "Heard Grandma Margaret left the house to Emily. So well deserved." I read them unsure whether to laugh or cry. They didn't need the truth. They only needed the story that fit their wishes. The following Monday morning, my mother video called me. Behind her, Emily was flipping through fabric samples for curtains. "We think it's best if you sign over most of the house to your sister. You can still keep part of it in name. Grandma wouldn't want you girls fighting over inheritance." I looked at them, both so polite, as if inviting me to a party. "I'm not fighting," I replied evenly. "I just have no intention of handing over my property." Emily raised her head, eyes wide. "Sadie, I thought we were family." I tilted mine. "Family doesn't mean someone has the right to force me to sacrifice just because they're used to receiving." My mother cut in, voice sharper. "You're being selfish. Emily is starting her life. That house is just sitting there." "And that's my right," I said firmly, "because Grandma left it to me, not to the family." Maybe at that very moment, they realized I was no longer the girl, sitting silently at the edge of the dining table, waiting for someone to finally notice me. My parents had always assumed I would give in, simply to avoid causing family trouble. But they forgot I was raised in a house where women knew how to sign contracts, understood inheritance law, and weren't afraid to stand alone when necessary. The storm had only just begun. But in my heart, I knew clearly. They hadn't come to preserve memories or honor the value of that house. They came to take, just like so many times before. And this time, I wasn't standing still to let it happen. Within 2 weeks of that video call, my phone barely stopped buzzing. Each morning when I woke up, dozens of messages lit up my screen from my mother, my father, Aunt Lisa, Uncle Howard, even one from Emily's high school friend I hadn't spoken to in over 10 years. Everyone had an opinion. Each message cloaked in concern, but beneath it was quiet pressure, filling up like air in a balloon. "Sweetheart, don't let your pride ruin family bonds," my mother wrote. "Emily's sensitive. She doesn't say it, but she's very hurt," Aunt Lisa added. "God teaches us to share, Sadie." Father Joseph, the family priest, texted along with a verse I hadn't memorized since I was 12. Reading those words, I felt like I was trapped in a long play where every role had already been cast. I was the heartless, selfish sister, and Emily was the wounded younger one, dreaming of building a home on family memories. One afternoon, as I left the office, I found Emily waiting outside, perfectly dressed, holding an iced tea like we had casually agreed to meet for a stroll. "Do you have a minute?" she asked softly, her tone sweet enough to make me wary immediately. I nodded, knowing full well there was nothing natural about this. We sat in a small cafe near the square. Emily stirred her drink, eyes drifting toward the street, before turning to me and placing her hand on the table. I don't want to fight over anything, Sadie. I feel like that house is the perfect place to start my new life with Brandon. Mom said, you're not tied to Charleston anymore, so why hold on to it? I met her gaze. And you think being tied means a marriage fully supported by mom and dad from beginning to end? She didn't answer, only bit her lip, feigning hurt. A familiar script. When I didn't react the way she wanted, her tone shifted. Actually, I think if you don't want to give it to me, then maybe we sell it and split the money. Everyone would be happy. Don't you see how tense you're making things? The tension didn't start with me, I said evenly. I inherited a property legally from the woman who raised me. You just want everything easy, because that's what you're used to. Emily pulled her hand back, showing the first flash of anger. I saw her expression change as the sweet mask slid off. You always think you're better, don't you? She hissed. You always want to prove you don't need anyone. But in the end, you're just a lonely woman in a cramped apartment, with no one by your side. I smiled, not because her words were gentle, but because I was so used to them wielding loneliness as a weapon to pressure me into giving up what was rightfully mine. I'm not lonely, Emily. I have the life I chose. And I don't need to take from anyone else to feel worthy. That evening, I received an invitation to my mother's birthday party with one line italicized clearly, "Your presence is essential for family unity." Though I suspected nothing would be simple, I went anyway, partly out of respect, partly because I wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. The party was held at the old Beacon Hill mansion, my parents' venue for every grand event, where each painting and vase was placed by the unspoken rules of the social circle they aspired to. Over 100 guests attended, from close relatives to acquaintances and even my father's business partners. I arrived exactly on time, wearing a light gray wool coat, carrying a small gift. As I stepped in, heads turned. Some nodded politely, others whispered. I didn't care. My mother approached, kissing me on both cheeks like we were a picture-perfect magazine family. I'm so glad you came, she said, pulling me toward the center of the hall. I hadn't even sat down when my father stepped onto the stage, tapping his glass to quiet the crowd. His voice boomed across the room. Thank you all for coming to celebrate Linda's birthday. We are truly grateful for the love of friends and family. And on this special occasion, we want to share some joyful family news. I exhaled slowly, my hand tightening on the strap of my purse. Our younger daughter Emily is about to be married. And like any loving parents, we are preparing to give her the start she deserves. My mother joined him, holding Emily's hand as she was led to the center. We are thrilled to announce that Sadie, Emily's sister, has agreed to transfer Grandma Margaret's house to her, a generous, loving gesture. We are so proud of you, Sadie. I stood frozen as applause erupted, the chandelier lights reflecting on Emily's smiling face, her eyes resting on me as if I had truly handed her my future. From backstage, a real estate agent stepped out with a file in hand. The family lawyer stood ready with pen and paper. Everything was prepared, rehearsed like a flawless performance. I walked forward slowly, stopping under the weight of every stare. Seems like no one asked whether I actually agreed. The room went silent. My mother's eyes flickered with confusion, my father's brow furrowed. Emily stepped back, lips pressed tight. I turned to the agent. I don't know who told you I'd sign anything, but I didn't come here to sell. And I certainly didn't come to be a prop in this family play. The lawyer closed the folder. The agent retreated. Silence grew heavier than sound. And me? I stood tall, no longer the shadow on the edge of the party. I stepped off the stage as more than 100 stunned guests stared. None of them had imagined that a night designed to celebrate family unity would collapse into such an unexpected twist. My mother stood frozen, my father whispering impatiently to the agent, tugging her sleeve. Emily tried to mask her panic with a smile, but it barely held. I didn't explain further. I simply stood straight, meeting each face as they tried to piece together what had just happened. In that moment, I realized they had never believed I could say no. To them, I was still the daughter who always complied, the sister who would cave under enough pressure, the one who would choose peace over claiming what was rightfully mine. But they had miscalculated. 3 days before the party, I had met Jonathan Pierce at a cafe near his office. He now ran a real estate investment and media conglomerate, expanding across the Southeast. He looked almost the same as when we first worked together, when I was head accountant at a startup he'd funded. A little more silver in his hair, but his gaze was still sharp. Sadie Morgan in the flesh, Jonathan smiled as I entered. It's been a while, but I still remember those financial reports that saved an entire project. I sat across from him, coffee still warm on the table. I hope I can help you again, but this time in a different role. From my bag, I produced a copy of the deed to Grandma Margaret's Charleston home. Jonathan flipped through silently, nodding once he reached the marked page. I need to sell this house as soon as possible, but under one condition, I said. His eyes lifted, brows raised, waiting. I slid forward a draft lease agreement prepared by my lawyer, 10-year terms, my right to remain in the upstairs apartment, with the option to buy back at the original price any time within the lease. He read carefully, his expression unchanged. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because I need someone who understands the line between business and family, and—" I paused, holding his gaze. "You happen to be the boss of my sister's company." Jonathan didn't laugh. He leaned back, fingers laced. "And if I agree, when do you plan on telling her?" "At my mother's birthday party, where they'll try to paint me as the one who sacrifices everything for family." He tapped his cup, turning it slightly. "I can do this, but you'd better be ready for what follows. They won't let you go easily." I nodded. "I don't expect them to, I just don't want them thinking I'm weak." 3 days later, the deal was sealed. The deed transferred, funds wired, the lease notarized, ironclad. The buyer's signature belonged to Jonathan Pierce, CEO of the real estate network opening a Charleston branch. A branch planned to use a traditional, symbolic property for its trial office, blending business with community presence. Grandma's house fit perfectly. I had kept only what I needed: the right to live upstairs, the room that once held my childhood and her memory, the right to protect those walls, and the right to stand tall as someone who no longer waited for permission to exist. Back at the party, when my words cut through their charade, the air grew suffocating with discomfort. My mother broke the silence first. "You're shaming your family in front of our friends, Sadie," she hissed, stepping closer. "Defending myself isn't shameful," I replied calmly. "But announcing in front of 100 people that I'd sign papers without ever asking me that island," my father came beside her, voice cold. "Don't drag this out, just sign. Everyone's ready, it's only your signature missing." I smiled faintly. "You don't need to worry, that house isn't mine anymore." My mother stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I sold it. Legally. 3 days ago." Emily shot up. "What did you just say?" "The new owner will use it as a regional office, with a valid lease. And yes, I'm living there legally for the next 10 years. I turned to the stunned agent, still holding her. "Unopened folder. Looks like you came to the wrong address." Her eyes darted nervously. My mother stepped back, lips pressed thin. My father stared as though I were a stranger. Emily said nothing. She just stared, no arrogance now, only the slow rise of fear, because I knew exactly what was dawning on her. Her boss, Jonathan Pierce, now controlled the very house she had imagined as her marital home. And the person still living there was the sister she'd tried to push out of her own life. They had forgotten I was no longer a pawn to be moved at their will. And I was no longer alone. The afternoon after the party, my mother called at exactly 3:30. Her voice flat, as though nothing had happened. "Come meet us at Grandma's house. Everyone will be there. I think it's time we all looked each other in the eye." I didn't answer right away. My eyes wandered out the living room window, where the old oak trees swayed gently in the breeze. From this upstairs room, I used to sit and read every weekend as a child. Grandma Margaret would always set out a cup of mint tea and a plate of cinnamon cookies, then quietly read alongside me without ever asking about the things that weighed on me. Here, I had never felt judged. And it was here, too, that I decided I would no longer allow anyone to trespass on what she had left me. After a few seconds of silence, I picked up the phone. "All right, if they want to come, I'll be waiting." I didn't say anything more to Jonathan, but I knew he'd show up right on time. He always did, and he was always precise. We had agreed from the start, when things escalated, his presence would be more than legal. It would mark the line between assumption and reality, between taking and rightful ownership. At exactly 4:30, my father's SUV pulled up at the gate. My mother stepped out first, wearing the light brown coat she often chose when she wanted to appear composed. Emily followed, clutching a folder. My father came last, carrying a black leather bag that I guessed was stuffed with documents. They weren't alone. With them came Aunt Lisa, Uncle Howard, and a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, likely a lawyer. The white gate to the house was already open. They didn't ring the bell, just walked straight into the yard as if everything still belonged to them. I stood on the porch, resting my hand lightly on the wooden railing I had repainted just last week. My father spoke first, his voice firm. "We're here to settle this once and for all. This has dragged on long enough." I stayed on the step. "Then please, come in. But before we talk, there's someone you should meet." The front door opened. Jonathan stepped out, sleeves of his white shirt rolled up, expression calm but resolute. He smiled politely at the group. "Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Pierce, the current owner of this house." Silence fell for a few seconds. Emily looked at him as if she couldn't comprehend what was happening. My mother stepped forward, her voice rising. "What did you just say? This is my mother's house. No outsider has the right to stand here and claim ownership." Jonathan remained composed, producing notarized copies of the deed. "Mrs. Margaret Morgan left this house to her granddaughter, Miss Sadie Morgan. She sold it to my company in a fully legal transaction, recorded at the Charleston County Registry 4 days ago. You're free to verify it." My father's tone hardened. "We don't recognize any transaction made without the family's consent. If necessary, we'll take this to court." Jonathan gave a slight shrug. "That's your right. But let me remind you the title has already been transferred. Any attempt at trespass or occupation could be considered civil violation." Emily finally spoke, her voice trembling. You're the CEO of Vision 360? Jonathan met her eyes, nodding. "Yes, and as part of our southeastern expansion, this house is set to serve as the temporary headquarters for our new media project, the very project you've been assigned to manage." Her face went pale, lips parting with no words coming out. My mother whipped around to glare at me, her eyes sharp. "What on earth have you done, Sadie?" I stepped down 3 stairs, speaking steadily. "I'm living in Grandma's house, and I'm honoring her will." Uncle Howard cut in. "Don't play word games with us. This is betrayal. No one in this family has ever treated their own like this." I turned to Jonathan calmly. "Would you show them into the living room?" They wanted to see the house. He caught on immediately, holding the door open. My father went first, shoulders tense. My mother followed, scanning the furnishings left intact since Grandma's days. Emily trailed behind, her eyes darting nervously around. Jonathan led them into the living room and laid several sets of contracts on the table. Every line, every figure watertight. This project was approved by my company's board of directors. The house has been appraised and paid in full. Miss Sadie was the legal seller and is now the legal tenant of the upstairs unit under a 10-year lease. All usage and ownership rights have been transferred. Emily still looked stunned. She turned to Jonathan as if pleading, "You can't make me work here." Jonathan's voice was calm. "I'm not making anyone do anything. If you feel this placement isn't suitable, you're free to request reassignment or resign according to company policy." My father shot to his feet. "This is a setup. You two planned this from the start. It's a scheme to humiliate my family." For the first time in years, his voice didn't make me flinch. "No one's humiliating anyone, Dad. I just refuse to keep silent. This house isn't a gift to divide. It's memory, legacy, something Grandma entrusted to the only person she believed would protect it." My mother inhaled sharply, fighting to keep control. "So, you're choosing to side with an outsider?" I answered slowly. I'm siding with the truth. And I've done exactly what Grandma always taught me. Know what you're signing, and never sign if it costs you your self-respect. The air in the living room felt compressed after my words. My mother sat rigid, fingers clasped tightly in her lap. My father hovered behind the sofa, eyes locked on the stack of contracts Jonathan had placed on the table. Emily stared into space, her face drained, as though her mind was still chasing a script that no longer applied. Jonathan sat beside me, calmly flipping through documents. No rush, no excess explanation. Just clear, precise presentation the way he'd always conducted his career. The transaction was notarized at Charleston Notary Office, file number 22739B. All procedures were finalized at 11 a.m. last Tuesday. The new deed has been filed with the Charleston County Court and is available for public record. The sale price was $850,000, $30,000 above market value. He paused, letting his eyes move across their faces. No one challenged him. They all seemed to realize any hope of soft negotiation had vanished. "Let me also clarify," Jonathan continued. "Miss Sadie is not only the seller, but also the legal tenant of the upstairs unit for 10 years, under a separately notarized lease, including a clause granting her the first right to buy back the entire property at the original price." I said nothing more. Every clause was laid out in black and white. My father's lawyer pulled out his phone, entering the file code. Moments later, he nodded toward my father and whispered something. My father's grip tightened on his briefcase. "You came well prepared." "Yes," Jonathan replied evenly, answering for me, "because we knew this wasn't about family sentiment. It's a legal matter, and from my side it's complete. There's no ambiguity or unfairness here." My mother shot up, shoving her chair back, eyes blazing. "Do you realize what you've done, Sadie? You sold my mother's house. A house that should belong to the entire family." I didn't look away. "I sold the house Grandma left solely to me, not to the family. And she wasn't mistaken in trusting me to do right by it." Emily finally spoke, her voice small and shaky. "Why him? Why did you sell to my boss? Did you want to humiliate me at work?" "It wasn't about hurting you," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I chose the one person who understood this space needed to be preserved, not treated as a prize for whoever was most coddled." Jonathan looked at Emily, then spoke slowly. "I'm not here to involve myself in family matters. But let me be clear, no one has been humiliated. Only those who can't control their own expectations feel insulted when someone else does what's right." No one answered. Aunt Lisa stared at the lease, as if combing it for loopholes. Uncle Howard stayed silent, his eyes on me, not angry anymore, but surprised, even cautious, as if seeing a Sadie they'd never taken the time to know. "So that's it?" my father asked, his voice dry. There's no way to get the house back? The lawyer shook his head. Unless there's proof of coercion or fraud, which I don't see here. Every signature is valid. The lease is notarized. The purchase price is fair. There's little basis for a lawsuit. My father turned to my mother. She said nothing, just sank back into her chair, her face pale. For the first time, she no longer looked like the woman who controlled every family gathering, but someone facing a reality entirely out of her hands. Emily stood, her eyes red but dry. I don't understand. When did you plan all this? What did I ever do to make you go this far? I took a deep breath, answering without anger, without distance. You didn't do anything special, Emily. You were simply given too much without ever asking where it came from. And I was the opposite. I had to learn to stand alone. And when I finally could, you didn't realize that made you uneasy. She turned away, saying nothing more. Jonathan looked at me, silent, but he didn't need to speak. What needed protecting, I had stood up and protected. The room held no more arguments, no more demands. No one asked me again to do the right thing for the family, because clearly the right thing I had done was protect my right to decide for myself with the lessons Grandma left me, with contracts in black and white, with clarity no one expected, and there was nothing they could do but accept it. On the Monday morning following that confrontation, I opened the upstairs window, the same one Grandma used to stand at to watch the garden each morning. Charleston's March air was still brisk, but sunlight softened across the brick path to the porch. Below, a few cars were parked. One I recognized immediately as Emily's silver, low roof, tinted rearview mirrors, new tires not even 6 months old. She stepped out, dressed neatly as always, but her face tight, no heavy makeup. Her eyes downcast, clutching her laptop bag against her chest, like a shield against something heavier than an ordinary Monday morning. She entered through the employee door. I stayed upstairs, no need to say a word, but I heard the door close, the sound echoing through the hall like a heavy sigh no one wanted to admit. Jonathan converted the ground floor into a temporary office exactly as planned. He didn't touch Grandma's old bedroom or living room. The kitchen stayed intact with only a modern coffee machine and a small refrigerator added for the staff. Her reading room became a meeting space, and the large living room turned into an open workspace, desks arranged in a U-shape to encourage collaboration between project teams. The department Emily was assigned to lead handled internal communications for the regional expansion campaign. It sounded impressive, but in reality, the job required precision, adaptability, and coordination qualities that couldn't be flaunted on a business card or hyped up in family banquets. 2 weeks into operations, I started hearing strange echoes carried through the old vents connecting the upstairs to the office below. Grandma Margaret had always told me never to seal those vents, because that was how the house breathed evenly. And now, thanks to them, I could hear the voice of Jennifer Mays, the project lead and Emily's direct supervisor, every time she addressed the team. Emily, I've reminded you 3 times already, the presentation must be ready before the 12th. Why is there still no draft? I'm reorganizing the content. I thought of shifting the approach to better fit the target audience. We don't need a new approach. We need to meet the deadline. Every delay drags the entire team down. A pause. And stop being late 6 straight days with traffic as an excuse isn't acceptable, especially when you live less than 50 steps away. I leaned against the window frame, coffee cup in hand. Each word carried up from below painted a picture of an Emily my family had never seen. No longer the pampered daughter wrapped in silk, no longer the one who always had someone cleaning up her mistakes. Now she was being judged by her actual abilities, and it seemed the protective shell she'd worn for years could no longer shield her from even the minimum expectations. Everyone in the office knew she was my sister. No explanation was needed. The tension in her shoulders each time she walked in, the sidelong glances from coworkers when my name came up, it all spoke for itself. One afternoon, I passed the back garden and overheard two young staffers talking by the lavender hedge. "So, Emily Sadie's sister?" the brunette asked. "Yeah, word is, she tried to claim this house once. Now she has to work here every day," the other replied, shaking his head. "Kinda sad, but fair." The first one shrugged. "I heard Sadie lives upstairs. She doesn't say much, but everyone likes her. The neighbors even said Grandma once told them, 'One day it'll be the quiet ones who preserve what truly matters.'" I stepped back from the fence before they noticed me. What I felt wasn't joy nor spite, just a quiet peace, knowing the truth was visible without me having to explain. Neighbors knew the story now. After the dramatic party and the confrontation at the house, whispers had spread, and gradually, support leaned toward me. Mary from across the street brought over an apple pie, said nothing, just placed it on the kitchen table and patted my shoulder. Margaret must be smiling from somewhere. Brad next door raised his hand every morning at the gate, like a small gesture of recognition. And Emily, she walked into this house each day like stepping into territory she had once tried to seize but failed. For her, it was no longer a place of privilege. It was a reminder that not everything in life belongs to the one used to receiving. Some things must be earned to be kept. And some values, even if not loud, endure like the grain of wood on the steps Grandma had once polished by hand. That Friday afternoon, I was watering plants in the garden when the screech of brakes echoed outside the gate. I looked up and saw my father's gray Lexus stop abruptly, tires still angled. My mother stepped out first, her face hard. No greeting, no sign of a casual visit. My father followed, holding a thick stack of papers. He slammed the iron gate open and walked in as if he still had authority here. I set down the watering can, wiped my hands on my shirt, and stepped forward. "What's so urgent that you couldn't call first?" I asked calmly. My mother stopped at the foot of the steps. "Urgent? You ask what's urgent, Sadie?" Her voice was sharper than usual. "You're destroying this family's reputation in front of everyone," neighbors whisper. Acquaintances call. "We're becoming a laughing stock." I held her gaze. "If they're laughing, it's because of what you chose to show them." My father snapped open the file, flipping pages. "We're suing. This transaction shows irregularities. A CEO buys a house from a former employee, then leases it back. That's collusion, manipulation of the law." I raised my brow. "I have a lawyer. Jonathan has his own legal team, and Charleston County Court already stamped the deal as valid. No one was coerced, no one exploited. The contract's clear, fully notarized. What exactly would you sue for?" He didn't answer immediately. My mother jumped in, clutching her purse. "We won't let this go. You've made your father lose face with the neighbors, forced me to bow my head at the women's club. Do you know what people are saying? That we treated you like a stranger? That Emily was spoiled enough to demand even the dead's inheritance?" I met her eyes, speaking each word clearly. "They're not saying that. They're just saying the truth." A gasp rose from the fence. I turned and saw Mrs. Peterson across the street, standing by the lavender bush, pruning shears in hand, openly curious. My mother saw her too. She turned back to me, whispering, but loud enough to carry. "If you had any blood loyalty left, you wouldn't shame your parents like this." I clenched my hands together to steady my voice. "If you had ever treated me like family, I wouldn't have needed the law to protect myself." My father climbed the steps, towering over me. "That's how you talk to the people who raised you?" I didn't move back. "I grew up in a house where only Grandma ever saw me. The rest of the time I was the kid, who had to do everything alone, while you called it independence. You only cared about Emily. She made mistakes, you covered. She demanded, you gave. And me? What did I get, besides silence and hollow words?" My voice wasn't loud, but every word sliced through the mask my parents had worn for years. My mother was about to respond when her phone rang. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and angrily declined. She hadn't slipped it back into her purse before it rang again. "Turn it off!" my father barked. She did, but they both knew something was spreading faster than they imagined. And then it came. Mary from next door appeared at the gate, phone raised. She didn't bother to hide it. "Sadie, you should know the clip from yesterday is online now. Full footage of you and your parents arguing in front of Mr. Pierce. Over 8,000 shares." I closed my eyes briefly. My parents froze. "Who filmed it?" my father asked, his face turning pale. Mary shrugged. "Not sure. Could have been one of Pierce's staff. Or a neighbor. Too many people saw that day." "What are they saying?" my mother asked, her voice nearly breaking. Mary looked straight at me, then answered plainly. "They're saying the Irving family has finally been exposed, that Margaret was right to leave the house only to Sadie, and that maybe Sadie should have been a lawyer instead of an accountant because she handled it all flawlessly." My father said nothing more. He just stared at me for a long moment, then nodded, whether in resignation or defeat, I couldn't tell. My mother turned away, eyes red. They returned to their car without another word. The Lexus backed out and disappeared at the end of the street, like a train pulling from a station without warning. That afternoon, my lawyer called. They filed a complaint, but the court rejected it. "No grounds for a case. You can rest easy." I thanked him, then stepped into the back garden where Grandma had once planted rows of yellow chrysanthemums. The scent of freshly cut grass lingered, sunlight streaming through branches. It was so peaceful I almost felt disoriented, as if all the storms had left behind only echoes. Someday, I thought, Emily might come back and ask why I made everything so airtight. And if that day came, I'd tell her what Grandma once told me on an autumn afternoon. When you run out of ways to make people understand your worth, let the law testify for you. I still remember that fateful morning when Emily walked into the old office inside what had once been Grandma Margaret's house. Her eyes looked like she'd just woken from a long dream. She wore a silver gray suit, her makeup carefully done, but her demeanor different. Gone was the arrogance she flaunted at family gatherings. In its place was unease, as if she were trying to hold on to something slipping away. Only 2 weeks after Jonathan had announced publicly that the project would operate here, everything inside the company had shifted quickly. I didn't interfere, I didn't need to. It all unfolded naturally, consequences born from Emily's own choices. I heard from staff that she kept arriving late, missing deadlines, losing her temper in meetings. Once, she even shouted at an assistant in the hallway for reminding her about a presentation. Everything she once boasted about her manager title, the CEO's trust, her bright future, had become burdens crushing her. One Wednesday afternoon, I was upstairs going through records when hurried footsteps pounded below, followed by a door slamming. Jonathan's voice rang out, calm but firm. "Emily, we've spent 2 months giving you support. But this week's report is still empty, the project is 3 milestones behind, and your team has no direction. We have no choice left." A silence stretched so long I wondered if I'd misheard. Emily didn't reply. Only the sound of her bag hitting the desk, then her heels striking the marble floor. I didn't go down. I didn't need to witness the moment the sister who once called me the pathetic accountant living off inheritance walked out of the house she thought would always be hers. Weeks later, I heard my parents had sold their suburban home, a 2-story place in Brookline where I'd lived during high school. They listed it hastily, nearly 20% under market value. Neighbors told me the house had already been mortgaged to cover Emily's graduate school tuition and car payments. Years of unchecked spending had piled up into a flood no one could stop. They moved to a small lakeside town in Maine, nearly 4 hours' drive from Boston. No goodbyes, no messages. Just a postcard from the post office, with a few rushed words. Hope you're well. No signatures, no names. As for me, life settled into peace, but not boredom. When Jonathan's fund relocated its office to a business district near Harvard Square, I proposed leasing back the entire ground floor of the house, the old living room, kitchen, and 2 back rooms. I spent weeks renovating, keeping the original hardwood floors laid by my grandfather, restoring the 60s-style window frames Grandma loved, installing new lights, soundproof walls, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. On opening day, I invited just 8 friends, all former colleagues or longtime clients from accounting and financial consulting. I named the firm Margaret and Company, a quiet tribute to the woman who had been the only one to stand by me without condition. From that small office, I began taking on budget consulting contracts for family-owned businesses, restructuring the books for local restaurants, and giving retirement investment advice to seniors. The work wasn't flashy, but it was steady. I controlled my own time, managed my own clients, and made every career decision myself, something I had never been allowed to do in over 20 years of living under a family that always treated me as the extra piece. Every day, I brewed coffee the way Grandma Margaret liked it, light brown, no sugar, with a pinch of ground cinnamon, and set it on the tea table she once used, now placed in the corner of my client area. I hung her black and white portrait on the main wall, right beside a vintage map of Boston from the 1950s that she had once kept in her study. Sometimes the neighbors would stop by. Mary brought apple tarts, Mr. Jenkins sipped coffee and told Navy stories. Everyone said the house now felt alive again, not a piece of inheritance to fight over, but a space for knowledge, kindness, and respect. One weekend morning, I received an envelope from my old company, where I had worked as an accountant right after graduation. Inside was an invitation to become a part-time lecturer for their applied finance training course. They wrote that many young people needed someone with real-life experience to guide them, and that they admired how I had rebuilt my path without leaning on anyone else. I folded the letter and looked around the house, once the spark of family division, now the foundation of a new life. I hadn't defeated anyone, I had only chosen not to lose. I stood under the lavender trellis by the stone walkway, the very spot where Grandma Margaret had spent her mornings trimming blossoms while humming softly and talking to the sparrows perched on the fence. The garden seemed awake again after months of neglect. The lilac by the corner was bursting with deep purple flowers, its fragrance floating in the early summer breeze. The dahlia bush I thought had died last winter bloomed once more, clusters of pale pink petals soft as the breath of someone long gone. I knelt by the wall, where Grandma used to plant mint and basil. In my hands was a small pot of cherry tomatoes, the kind she always said would bring good luck if cared for with love. I placed it down, pressed soil gently around the roots, and watered it. Carefully, as if not to disturb the stillness that wrapped the garden. Never had I felt so rooted to a place. Not because the house was beautiful, not even because it held my childhood memories, but because after all the struggles, calculations, and wounds, I finally had a place I could call my own, a place no one could claim back with power, bloodlines, or empty promises. I lifted my head, sunlight breaking through the leaves and falling across my hair, the dark brown glinting with streaks of red. A breeze drifted by, like her voice reminding me, as long as you hold on to your values, everything will fall into place. Maybe she hadn't said those exact words, but I believed if she were alive, she would smile at the woman I had become. My phone buzzed. A message from Jenny, a new client I had just signed for personal financial coaching. She was a single mother running a small bakery on Beacon Street. The text was simple. Sadie, thank you. I'm no longer afraid of the end of the month. I read those words, and warmth spread through me. Small things like that, not the big parties, not media recognition, were what made my work feel meaningful. She had once taught me that silence held power. I didn't go online to talk about family drama, nor did I fight back against gossip. But the witnesses, the videos, the quiet apologies from neighbors, they all told the story on their own. I didn't need to add a word. When I walked through the garden, people from the neighborhood often stopped at the white fence to greet me, to admire the revived flower beds, to share their own stories. An elderly widow told me about her husband who had been forced off his ancestral land by distant relatives. A young woman, recently divorced, said she found hope to begin again after hearing the story of this house. None of them were related by blood, yet in a way, they were family people who recognized effort, respected space, and gave without expecting something in return. Each late afternoon, when I turned off the office lights, closed the accounting books, and stepped into the small backyard where Grandma used to place her rocking chair, I sat there for a while. I sipped hot tea, watching the sun fade over the roof tiles. No scolding voices, no demands, no burden of proving I deserved love. Just me, whole, peaceful, and completely free. Someone once asked me if I would do anything differently if I could go back. My answer was no. Not because I enjoyed the pain, but because those blows taught me the greatest lesson. You can't choose the family you're born into, but you can always choose your boundaries and your values. My resistance wasn't in shouting or tears or dramatic comebacks. It was in every contract clause I drafted with care, in the figure that set the sale price, in the right to lease back the second floor protected by law, and in the long-term promise I made to myself that from now on, no one would ever cross the boundary of self-respect that had taken me a lifetime to rebuild. Emily had moved out by then, apparently living with my parents in Maine. I no longer cared about her presence. The voices that once echoed arrogantly in this house were now only faint memories. I held no grudges, waited for no apologies, because the greatest restoration was not in watching others fail, but in knowing I had survived the storms while keeping my own gentleness intact. At the end of the stone path in the garden, I placed a small wooden sign carved with the words, "Home is where you're respected." A simple reminder, yet profound enough to anchor me the truth that a home isn't where you're born, but where you're seen, heard, and allowed to be yourself. I share this story not to reopen the past or wound anyone again. I share it so those silently enduring within their own homes, the very places meant to be safe, might find a voice, a belief that silence is not the price of love. Have you ever asked yourself, what truly makes a family? Is it blood, or the people who never demand you sacrifice yourself just to belong? I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, because sometimes it only takes one voice for others to find the courage to speak. If you've ever felt overlooked in your own home, if you've ever fought to reclaim the worth no one had the right to take, share it. Maybe your story will be the light guiding someone else through their darkest stretch. And if what I've shared has given you even a touch of feeling, a moment of reflection, follow this channel to journey with me through more stories to come. We'll meet again in family gatherings, sweet and bitter, in conflicts that seem small but reshape a lifetime, in peaceful moments reclaimed after storms. Because sometimes the gentlest revenge is living so happily and so clearly that no one dares to deny your worth.